Hello and welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today we're joined by Jaylyn Sanchez. Jaylyn, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm pumped for today. So yeah, let's just jump into it. Could you share with everybody a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So again, my name is Jaylyn Sanchez. I am currently in a talent acquisition lead role, but I've only been in talent acquisition and recruiting for about 6 years now. Prolucent Health, my company, we are a Series A startup, and we will be hitting our 3rd year here coming in January, about to enter Series B funding as well. And right now we are roughly about 64 employees at this time, and we are in the healthcare technology field.
Nice. So are you in healthcare tech? Are you seeing that was, I think, pretty explosive growth over the past couple of years. Was it correlated at all to what was happening with COVID or not?
Yes, okay. Very much so. We actually created a product that's a job board, specifically to help healthcare, individuals, companies better streamline and automate their application process so they're not missing out on any full-time permanent employees.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Because contingent labor is huge in this field. So we actually opened up right before COVID. Wow. Then COVID hit and that growth spiked. So
yeah.
Yep. Unknowingly put ourselves in a good position.
Yeah. What timing? What great timing there.
Right.
Lord, yeah, that's
good timing and a lot of work. So
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. A lot of hard work has to back it up, right? Okay, cool. So we there's a lot we could talk about, and also knowing that it's obviously tied to talent acquisition. I think that there's some things we can talk about there. But just first and foremost, we wanted to talk a little bit about the transition from talent acquisition into candidates becoming employees and that employee journey and trying to set people up for success and making sure that they can add value to the organization, that they're getting the support that they need, and that ideally they stay with the company for a little while. Not that we have like crazy expectations, being that we're in tech, right? Ideally, like, people stay long enough to where, like, they can actually deliver the outcomes that the company wants them to, right? So like, what have you been experiencing? So you're like, what's been the evolution, right? You guys are growing really quickly, probably hiring fast. What are the biggest gaps and opportunities you've seen with onboarding and retention?
I would say the biggest gaps definitely right in the beginning. I came in and within the first 6 months they wanted 50 positions filled. And of course, putting your recruiter cap on, I'm like, yeah, no problem. But then you start to get into more, retention as a piece of it as well. And you don't want to bring on, because we were hiring so quickly, people were just started to get lost in the sauce a little bit, right? So you're funneling all these people in. Every onboarding your call you're having every Monday is having 20 new faces in it. And then, you're having your company meetings once a quarter and you're realizing almost 10 of those faces have dropped off. So where's the disconnect? And sometimes as recruiters, we have a goal, and it's to fill that position. We got the opening, we need to fill that hole. But I think what we miss in the in-between is making sure that it's also our job to, like you said, make that transition happen, right? So now they're turning from that candidate into the employee, and that needs to be a smooth transition. And that goes along with even, every piece of onboarding, every piece of hiring manager communication, none of that communicating should stop at all during the time an offer letter gets sent out to the time that the employee actually starts. There should be communication all the way through, whether that's from talent acquisition, HR, a peer that they're going to be working with, or their direct hiring manager. So a big piece that I take on as the lead in talent acquisition here is I will set calendar reminders to ping the hiring managers and ping the peers and tell them, hey, I know your candidate or your employee doesn't start for 2 weeks, but maybe shoot them like a congrats email. Maybe shoot them like, hey, can't wait to work with you, man. So excited to see you. Let me know if you have any questions. Just keeping that engagement piece there so that they actually show up on the first day. So that's key. That's number one. Do they show up first day?
Right. Yeah, that's so we called it like a pre-onboarding checklist. Like, here's all the stuff that we need to do prior to somebody starting. So whether that be like shipping out the computer or doing the touch bases or everything else, I think is really important. just kind of, hey, here's what to expect in your first week, right?
Yep.
Like maybe some key introductions, like, and it's a balancing act, right? Because people are still working at their other jobs, so it's not like we want to give them like a ton to do, but
Right.
usually I try to give them a little bit to do because I want to see
A
the
little
engagement,
research.
like,
Yep.
hey, can you take an hour or so just to have like a call like once a week? Like,
Yeah.
and if a candidate gets really annoyed about that, to me, it's like, okay, I don't think this, is
A
this
little
person
bit of a
really?
red flag.
Yeah, it is. It usually doesn't work out very well when that happens. But
Right.
I think, I think the biggest missed, I think the biggest miss for startups in general, and even like some larger companies, is that their onboarding is just terrible. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also, even for a later growth stage, right? It's so heavily dependent on a per department and per hiring management basis. Like there's not
Yep.
a consistent template of, hey, this is what the onboarding experience should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that, like, when I look at greenhouse and approvals and these types of things, I try to think about like, hey, when roles are opened, what is the onboarding plan? Like part of
Mm-hmm.
that checklist for making a role live and making it a priority for the talent acquisition team. Like, let's have executives, whoever signs off on that opening, like should be reviewing the onboarding a 90-day plan to ensure that it's
Yep.
actually like robust enough. And there should be some kind of HR provided template of like, hey, here's all the things you have to hit. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to,
Mm-hmm.
this should be XYZ calls. There's like is there a buddy system? Like what are we doing? And then there's obviously hiring managers can customize that. But if you don't kind of have a unified template and you don't have some kind of approval process, that shouldn't happen when an offer is accepted. It should
Yep.
happen when the job is opened. Because if somebody, like, going into a job being open, if they don't know how the person's going to be successful or ramped, then like companies shouldn't hire for that yet.
Right.
My thoughts,
Because it's going to
Yeah.
be chaos once they actually get in. So that is something that we do require actually. And Jazz HR is what we're using right now. And they're really good about during the approval process for a job, there's a whole workflow just for the approval process in regards to
Right.
what you were speaking to. Like we need to get the 30-day and the 90-day plan from the hiring managers. We need to make, compensation, make sure everything is packaged well and nicely. Okay, who's going to run this onboarding call? Who's going to run the IT onboarding call? Is Shamar going to even be available that week? So on and so forth, right? So it is really coordinating and making sure that all the puzzle pieces are matching together before you even jump into talking to people. Because everything could be going well in my conversation with them, but if I don't have my team to back it up and the workforce of it, from the manager's approval or just even their attention in general, that is key. Is sometimes in a startup, you have so many things moving at once that in their brain, sometimes I feel like it could be like, oh, well, I'll worry about it when it gets here. But if you
Yeah.
worry about it when it gets here, it's too late. There's a lot that we have to do before that in order to make sure that they do not feel like they're on an island alone. And that's a big deal, especially in a startup right now. That is, I would say, my biggest hurdle in my new job is just making sure that nobody feels like they're left alone. There's
Yeah.
always somebody you can go to. I handle all our 30, 60, 90-day, 6-month check-ins. And again, I let them know, hey, this is nothing formal. It's just an open platform for you to be able to say what you need. Is there something I can help you with? We are always here.
Right. And another thing, just like for startups in general, and primarily even like early growth stage, I'm not saying that like founders and co-founders need to be like in the weeds building onboarding plans, but they should have an expectation that somebody is reporting to them what onboarding requirements look like.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is, to me, it's like an executive level thing that founders and C-levels should be looking at, because the quality of the onboarding experience is going to have a direct impact on the value that and the ROI that employee can bring to the table. And if that process is messed up, or some hiring managers aren't doing it consistently, or whatever else, like that could be a huge problem.
It really sets the tone for their career, honestly, with us. If we give them a bad taste in the mouth with just onboarding, then there might be some issues later on down the road, or maybe some misinformation that would have been good to know in the beginning, but because we didn't have our ducks in a row, we missed out on that opportunity to gain that.
Right. Yeah. And so when you think about retention, like, what do you consider good retention in tech? Like, I have some thoughts that I think a lot of people probably disagree with, because I don't have very many expectations, quite honestly.
I was like, are you talking numbers?
Yeah. Like if you,
Okay.
so if somebody like, okay, 2
For
years, or
me,
do
it's
you
5
consider
years. If I can get
5?
someone 5 years, I'm like,
Damn.
wow, I did amazing.
Really? In tech? Like, okay, so I would, good luck.
Yeah.
So honestly, if somebody in tech, if somebody stays with the company a year, I'm like, okay, great. I just don't like the whole 2-year average thing.
Yeah.
That's like in talent acquisition across the board. In tech, I just like, I don't get me wrong. I'm all for retention, particularly for a few key
Hmm.
strategic roles. It's nice to have people that know the company really well. But
Right.
there's also a ton of value in the creativity and energy that new people bring to the table,
Yes,
and the new solutions that they can bring to the table. And sometimes when you
for
have
sure.
somebody in a role for 5 years, like they're bringing the same like stuff to the table, and it's like,
Very true.
so it's like a balancing act. So I like
Yeah.
the idea of like, okay, it's nice to have variety. It's nice to have some people at the
Yes.
company who've been there for a while.
Now, I guess
Yeah,
selfishly, I stay 5 years for like for me, these are hard to fill roles, right? Like a full
right.
stack developer. That was a hard role to fill and took some time. So I'm like, please stay here for 5 years.
Yeah, just
Please
stay here.
just, all I need is 5. But I mean, in the sense of like our data scientist, our reporting analyst, or our data analyst, those I do see or have seen lower retention on those.
Yeah,
And that, though, the reason why they sometimes move is because internally there's not a fast enough growth for them.
yeah.
And like you said, they're just doing the same thing over and over. It's you need to know very specific things to do your job, but it is very repetitive.
Yeah.
So they leave quickly because there's not another step to take as quickly as they would like to.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, I'm pretty, again, too. I just think this is another reason why onboarding is so important. Like, so HR typically, it's like all of the focus is on retention, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then they're not like, people aren't thinking about, hey, how do we optimize onboarding to accelerate how quickly people can ramp so they can start adding value faster? And so one
Right.
of the things I talk about is like, okay, yes, retention's important, but let's also focus on that front end, like what we were just talking about
Mm-hmm.
let's actually make onboarding good. Let's build process docs around it. Let's put the right approvals in place, because ultimately, if we can have people really add value quickly, retention becomes less important. And
Yeah.
as a company, you don't want to be like too heavily leveraged on a single person.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to plug people in so that when individuals leave, it doesn't mess with momentum in the company. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to be able to get value out of people quickly, to have clearly defined role descriptions, trying to keep those simple. Not, it's hard when you're first doing a startup, because it's like you need generalists that do a million things. But when you start to achieve like a small level of scale, like around 50 people, at that point you should have specialists, right? Probably
Yeah.
maybe even closer to 30 people. So define role descriptions, cutting down on what the role descriptions are, optimizing onboarding. And you need to, like I tell my client, like you have to be able to run effectively with an average tenure of 9 to 12 months. If you can do that, you're going to be fine. Now,
Yeah.
obviously shoot for 2-3 years, right?
Yep.
And that's great. And provide promotion paths and, plan like career mapping and all of those things clearly articulated and transparent is
Mm-hmm.
going to help.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's like, that's a great goal, but also how effectively would we be able to run our business if average tenure was 9 months?
Right.
Let's solve that. And then we can also
Let's
solve the
not take
retention
6
problem.
months to ramp somebody up.
Yeah. Like just do both. Like, and that's,
Yeah.
a lot of companies just don't get that, right? They're just like,
Yeah.
all they're doing is focusing on retention, but they're not doing the stuff like what it sounds like you guys are doing with like approvals for onboarding. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not mutually exclusive, right? But that's the conversation is so much more focused on retention. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would say, to add to that, with today's recruiting market, how there's a big shortage in a lot of talent areas right now. And so you don't have that option anymore to get exactly what you need so that they can come in right off the bat and start producing right away. You do have to invest a little bit more nowadays, but it is like you said, we got to figure out how can we invest more in a short amount of time so if the tenure was only 9 months, we can still be okay with just that 9-month tenure that we have from them.
Yeah.
And I think a big piece of that as well was, yes, the onboarding checklist, but it's also this is something that the first time I've ever done it, but we have integrated kind of weird off normal work hour training schedules. So instead of a person coming in and starting their first day on a Monday morning at 8:00 a.m., we have them start from 3 p.m. and they go till 6, or something like that. So it's a little off, but that way the hiring manager is truly devoted to them during that time and those hours, because that's when they have the most availability and when they're most free to give them that dedicated and divided attention.
That's really interesting, because if you think about it, like 8 a.m. on a Monday morning is the worst time for an executive or a hiring manager to be like, oh, fuck, I got to do this getting started call with this person. And then I have all this other stuff.
Mondays are the worst in general. We can all say that.
Yeah. Like if you're in any position where you're managing a team, it's just a total storm.
It's a shit show.
It's a total shit show. Yeah, it's that's actually really fun.
Having those off hours, we've actually found to be a little more beneficial, just because our managers are now more dedicated. So now the actual employee that we just brought in is just starting feels like, oh wow, I'm learning so much and I'm gaining so much attention and getting everything I need. But now that, which maybe would have taken 2 to 3 weeks of hour to 2 hour calls a day here and there, was just banged out in a week, just because we changed the schedule of what they started for, just for that 1 week.
Yeah. And then you don't have new hires just sitting around going like, okay, well, what do I do between this call and the next one in 3 hours?
Right. And they're just twiddling their thumbs like, well, this is fun, getting paid to do nothing.
Yeah. It's like, okay, if I'm not doing it, I'd rather just have everything blocked together in 3-4 hours. And then, okay, so I think the way that we're doing it right now, it's, I can't remember because I'm a little bit more detached now, but it's, we did a lot of recording, like video recordings and process docs. So when we were onboarding people, we just started hitting record and then using those videos and then plugging them in and giving people access to that when they start. So I think it's like a 3-hour block of self-learning, through videos and process. And then they meet with the hiring manager for 30 to 45 minutes after that. And then they ask just follow-up questions. That way, don't we have to repeat the same stuff for scale positions, right?
Right.
And then the same thing in the afternoon. It's another block of a couple of hours. And then they have an opportunity to ask follow-up questions. So we're trying to do that to make it less of a heavy lift for our hiring managers. And then also just a better experience for new hires where they're not just everything's scrambled with people's availability. We only have to schedule 2 meetings a day versus scheduling a bunch of stuff every different type of training, that has helped us.
Really crazy.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, I'm trying to think there was actually a particular case where that actually happened. And that's why we implemented the whole, hey, first week training is a little off schedule. Because especially in a startup, you got to do what works for you as a company. Right. And so if all your managers are busy on Mondays through Thursdays from 8 to 9, well, then it looks like your new starts probably shouldn't start until 10. And maybe for that first week until they get a little acclimated with how your company works and why. It's not that we don't want to dedicate time or attention to you. It's that we literally don't have the time to do it right now. But we still prioritize you, right? So here's the way we can make it work. So I do think, and again, being my first time in a true startup like this, it's trial and error. The first solution you bring to the table, it may not be the right one. It may not ever be the right one. But it's just being patient, for me at least, and being able to understand change is okay and being able to pivot quickly. That was the hardest thing for me. And being a TA, right? I feel like we get our schedules and we know exactly what we're doing and we just keep going and shooting those candidates out and doing those submissions and filling those positions. But when it comes to more of the granular things, specifically like onboarding and retention, there's a lot you can do to spice it up. And like you said, the recordings, I think that's a great thing. We're right now creating a resource bank. So same thing for our employees, hey, so that is one of the things we shoot out to them, that first week before they start. Hey, here's a resource bank, take a look around so that they can come to the, onboarding call with some questions and not just your basic, oh, how's your 401k work? Ask us some more detailed things.
That doesn't have to be a conversation. That's what I learned too. There's a lot of onboarding stuff that it's if somebody's just repeating themselves, consistently on a call, that shit should be recorded, either through
Yes.
video or text. Like, there's no reason to have a hiring manager making like a high salary just waste their time and the payroll of the new hires' time
Yes.
just on like pointless meetings. That's why I prefer the follow-up question style. It's like, all right, we're gonna give you this information in bite-sized chunks, and then you can ask us follow-up questions opposed to us repeating this like information that we
Yep.
just didn't need to discuss verbally
Yep.
live. So yeah, that was super helpful. And so like what do you in terms of retention too, what do you guys do in terms of like maybe performance reviews or
Mhm.
like career mapping or promotion
Yeah,
paths? Like how robust are you? Because you guys are still pretty early stage, so
we
it would
are.
make sense if you don't have all that completely
Yep.
built out yet. So I'm just curious like where you're at being a 64 person company right now.
Yeah, so career pathing is something that we've really been diving into recently with each individual department, speaking with hiring managers on a call with the CEO, CFO, like what are we seeing or what is the path and career plan for our company first? Like, where do we first, like, let's see that for the next year. What are we looking at? Right.
Right.
And then from there, diving into each position. So that is still ongoing. But in regards to performance reviews as well, because when I started, I think like our 18th hire. So a lot of those first performance reviews will be happening this coming January. So we haven't really dived into it just yet, but we are starting to have those conversations of like, hey guys, we will have these performance reviews. There's no KPIs. We have not initiated KPIs around anything yet. Again, because everybody's just moving at 1,000 miles an hour. So for us, it's more this past year in the company, I can for sure say it has been off of retention, building the quality relationships with our employees, letting them know like, hey, we're in the trenches with you. You're not alone. We understand that this is a lot of work and we do ask a lot from you. So more of I feel like where our performance reviews are going to go is more based off of just the true work that they've done, right? We haven't measured it on any base, but being transparent with them and showing them here's where our company is, here's where you were and we were when you started, and now look. So it's going to be more comparison, like any review would be, but more so just on a whole of what their work style and what their work has provided for the company in general. Now, going into this next year, we have already started implementing those KPIs so that they are ready for that. But this year, it's definitely going to be different, I feel like, compared to a lot of other companies that aren't startups, maybe. Right. Annual reviews, how they're going to work. So it's a little different for sure.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, I a lot of times will recommend quarterly reviews, performance reviews. So it's just a faster feedback loop. It's better for the employees, I think. Sometimes I like, and then also it helps the managers keep a pulse on performance more closely. And it ensures that if, performance adjustments need to be made, they're made quickly. And also, I mean, this isn't a fun conversation necessarily, but the reality is like, also you need to document these. Like if you have performance issues, you need documentation, and quarterly documentation is better. So if somebody isn't performing, you can give them a heads up, and then, next quarter, if it's not better, you can let them go, and you're less likely to have to deal with like liability or, potential.
For sure.
Sometimes you fire somebody due to performance and they, don't want to take ownership of that. And so it's good to have like documentation of those things.
I would say being as small as we are right now, we don't do quarterly check-ins or reviews, right? But our managers, we do require them to no more than, or don't go any longer than a 2-week period, right? So you need to either have like a team meeting cadence every 2 weeks, but the majority of our leaders actually have them at least once a week. Some of our leaders talk to their people every single day.
Right.
And I mean, I'm like, that's amazing. And so right now, again, as we get bigger, we won't be able to have those things. As your teams get larger, you can't talk to 20 people. I mean, your whole day would be taken up, right? You're not doing anything now. So for right now, that's what's working for us. That's where we're catching those gaps. That's when, okay, hey, so we are seeing something consistent. We've talked to them for the past 2 weeks. Nothing's changed. So let's engage with HR and see what we need to do, right? And even as a small company, it's even harder to have those questions or those conversations because our hands are really tied into every single piece and we know everybody on a real personal level. You're not just a number anymore. But we've already had, we've had to have conversations of performances or, maybe attendance, especially when you're on a flex PTO schedule. That's even harder, right? They're like, oh, I thought I could just have it all.
Right.
So yeah, no, I mean, we have implemented that. And again, that's what works for us right now at the size we're at, is those bi-weekly at the, minimum is what you need to have. But usually they talk to them every day or at least once a week. And I feel like as long as you're creating that communication, I don't think there's such a thing as over communicating with your employees.
Yeah.
So as long as that open door is there, you'll be able to catch these things as they come and be able to process them as they come as well.
For sure. Yeah. For us, like, we don't need quarterly because we are pretty much our largest department is delivery, right? So recruiters that we have, embedded at clients. And so we're meeting with their manager weekly, and we go through progress. And if there's a performance issue, we're not going to wait till any type of like quarterly thing. I mean, we bring it up like,
right.
Hey, like we need to make XYZ adjustment. And we have a several step process where it's like, okay, if it's not fixed the first time, we talk about the second time and a third time. And then ultimately there's like a PIP process, right? And we don't have to go there often, but we have a defined process for that, right? Which is important. But, I actually, if it's cool, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. And I just want to talk a little bit more about Prolucent. Can you tell me more about the gap that you're filling in terms of the platform and how it's different than other solutions, and why your team was able to thrive and take advantage of some of the market conditions we were experiencing in 2020?
Of course. Yeah. So Prolucent Health, so basically the product we have created, again, acts as a job board to consumers. So we attract people through, different marketing tools to come and apply to the jobs. It's called Liquid Compass is what we host them on. That's our database warehouse. And those are jobs nationwide for any position underneath an MD level. And then on the back end, it acts as like an applicant tracking system. So, employers can go in and see a candidate's profile, reject them, send them messages, accept them, schedule meetings, so on and so forth. So the gap we were seeing is that contingent labor is huge in the healthcare industry. And it's never going to go away. There's always going to be a need for it regardless. People are always going to have maternity leave, sick leave, vacation time, so on and so forth. The issue is that these same people that hospitals were hiring on the contingent side were trying to apply for full-time roles, but the technology, the recruiting technology that the hospitals have just wasn't up to speed. It was taking 30 minutes to 45 minutes to just do one application for a nurse. And halfway through, they just wipe their hands clean. They're like, I'm not doing this. This is too much, right? So that's what our product does. It automates and streamlines specifically for the hospital needs, for those frontline workers. So now they're not missing out on those full-time candidates, and now they're not having to go to a staffing agency to pay double the price for that one person, and now only for a 13-week contract.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's cool.
Yep. So again, contingent labor not going anywhere. We understand that, but we're definitely just trying to somewhat regulate the hospitals and what they're staffed with, because also if they're staffed with contingent labor, their patient care status goes down. And then they get rejected for big cases or anything like that, right? Because you just have people on rotating contracts in and out. They're not really invested in, company morals and things like that. So having full-time permanent roles with 50% of that being, over 50% of that staffed in your hospital is going to be the best bet for you and for the people you're taking care of.
So what's the latest with like healthcare recruitment in general? Are things starting to is demand starting to come back down, or is it staying pretty consistent with where it was a year or two ago? Like what trends are you seeing out there right now?
I feel like healthcare, it's hard to find a trend, right? Because if there's a disaster, for instance, a disaster just happened in Florida, people are begging for others to go over there, right? They're like, please we need all the help we can get. So obviously there's a spike in that region because they need all the help they can get right now. But I would say because of COVID, there's been a drop in contingent labor. Hospitals don't need it as much as they used to, but they have so many just part-time staff or PRN or contingent labor still because of the overflow from COVID that they thought they would need. That's what the trend is right now. It's kind of dispersing those, getting back to somewhat normal. So it's nothing crazy high, like skyrocketing numbers like we did when there was COVID. It's definitely started to level out a little bit. But of course, in those certain areas, you have those disasters where it spikes again, right? But I would say across the board, it's pretty much leveled out for the most part. But people are starting to be burnt out from what COVID caused. So
yeah, I
that's another drop.
Right. And so your solution is only for hospitals. Do you think, is there an opportunity to expand beyond that, or is your team just staying laser focused on solving for that exact buyer persona, if you will?
I would say I personally, apart from Prolucent, would say that, yeah, there's definitely a need for the technology that we have across many of our healthcare, other industries, right? So like dermatology, dentistry, so on and so forth. They have issues finding positions for them too, for themselves. But I think right now, the biggest gap was hospitals. It was just directly having individuals in those hospitals, not on contingent labor, not on contracts, being full-time permanent employees.
Yeah.
So that is where the biggest gap was. And again, even before COVID, and then COVID hit and it really created it even more. So that's where I think they're staying. And a lot of these hospitals, it's going to take them a long time to recoup from what COVID has done. This isn't, we're not a quick fix. We are like your long-term solution. This is something that we can't promise you is going to change in the next year, but our goal is to definitely get it back to somewhat regular by that end of year, and then continuing to help you manage that process and help you manage your third-party vendors and understand what now your hospital really needs, right? Or do we need to put out a full-time need instead?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, like great timing in
terms
of getting this product to market like right before COVID. Obviously, execution is critical, and that's a big part of the success. But yeah, I mean, timing is pretty pretty on point.
It was on our side for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Good time to be in healthcare tech.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's also pretty great. I mean, our CEO, his mom was a nurse. And then we have like some extremely amazing executive nurses on our board, and it's a very mission-driven company. So I think that's the other reason why we're sticking to a hospital. It's kind of, stick to what you know.
Right. I mean, if it's working and you're growing and the company's thriving, like why, stay focused, do fewer things really well.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's like the more experience I get, the more I'm like, okay, I don't want to do 10 things. I just want to like crush it at maybe 2 or 3.
Yep.
And that's actually, it makes it easier to scale, right? Like complexity is the enemy of scale. Like the more simple you can make your solution, if there's a big enough addressable market, the easier it's going to be to scale that solution. So I'm all with you on that. But this has been a ton of fun. We're coming up on time here.
Awesome.
So Jaylyn, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to follow you or engage with you online, how can they find you?
Yeah, I would definitely say you can find me on LinkedIn. I am Jaylyn Sanchez on LinkedIn. Again, talent acquisition lead with Prolucent Health. It looks like Proluctant, but it is Prolucent.
Prolucent. All right. Good stuff. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on today.
Yes, I appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Take care.